Hello and welcome to Omni Deep Dive. We explore any topic from finance and technology to literature and science. Sit back, focus, and get ready to dive deep.
We've all had this experience, right?
Right.
You're reading a really dense, ancient text, and suddenly you hit a line that it stops you cold.
Mm-hmm.
A passage that, when you read it at face value, is shocking, or maybe morally confusing, or just plain weird.
Exactly.
Today, we're wrestling with the toughest of those. We are tackling the hard sayings of the Bible.
And that's the core problem for any modern reader, really. If you just jump in, cherry pick a sentence here or there without the historical context, you're going to completely miss the original intent.
Which our sources say is rooted in a purpose and loving intention of the letter.
Right, you miss the whole point.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to go beyond that surface reading and give you the context that makes sense of the shocking parts.
We're doing it with what we're calling a hard sayings tier list.
Yes, and we're starting in the deep end. Tier 1. Violence, the commands that really challenge our modern morality.
Then we'll move to tier 2, the weird stuff.
Where it's less violent and more just culturally baffling.
And finally, we'll get into tier 3, theological anxiety, where God's own actions can seem profoundly ambiguous.
But to do this, we need a specific tool.
We do. It's a discipline called hermeneutics. It's not just reading, it's the actual process of pulling the intended meaning out of an ancient text.
I mean, you have to, right?
Of course. You found a coded message from 3,000 years ago. You couldn't just guess. You'd have to ask, what did this mean to the people who first read it in their situation? Without that, you're guaranteed to misunderstand it.
Okay, let's do it. Tier 1, the violence and extreme commands. This is the stuff that genuinely makes people put the book down.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking capital punishment, total destruction. Let's start with that command in Deuteronomy. For certain cities, the instruction is, well, it's chilling. Thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth.
Yeah.
The modern reaction is just, that's a command for genocide. How can you possibly add context to something that severe?
So the first thing we have to do is look at the distinction the text itself is making, both legally and geographically. That command for total destruction.
The nothing that breatheth part.
Yes. That was given specifically for a very small number of local nations. The Canaanites, Hittites, Jebusites, the people who were already living in the land Israel was about to inherit.
Wait, so this rule wasn't for every war they fought? It wasn't a global policy?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And that's the critical piece of context. If they were fighting a city that was, quote, very far off, the instructions were completely different.
How different?
They were commanded to offer terms of peace first. If the city said yes, they'd just become tributaries. If they refused and fought back, only the men were killed. The women, children, and livestock were taken as spoil.
So the absolute destruction was tied only to that specific land.
Exactly. It was framed as a unique moment of divine judgment on the original, deeply corrupted people of that particular land.
But why? Why was it so extreme for them?
Because the text frames it as a judgment that had been delayed for a very long time. There's an earlier passage in Genesis that says the iniquity of the Amorites was not yet full.
Implying they were given time to change their ways.
Precisely. By the time of Deuteronomy, the idea is that these nations were now subject to that judgment because of practices that were seen as a total spiritual corruption. The command was a kind of spiritual quarantine to make sure that corruption didn't infect the new community Israel was supposed to build.
That distinction, local judgment versus a standard protocol for war, is huge. But let's go to something that feels even more disturbing on a personal level. The aftermath of the war with Midian. After the battle, Moses tells the soldiers to kill every male among the little ones and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him, but to keep the young girls alive for yourselves. Why that specific horrifying breakdown?
Okay, so this action, which sounds monstrously arbitrary to us, only makes sense when you link it directly to what just happened. The Midianites weren't just some random enemy. They were the group who had, on the counsel of a prophet named Balaam, just successfully tricked Israel into mass idolatry and sexual sin. And that sin resulted in a divine plague that killed 24,000 Israelites.
So this isn't just anger after a battle. It's a reaction to a catastrophic national security threat, a biological and spiritual one.
Exactly. The action against the adult males and the sexually experienced women was seen as an act of divine prevention. It was a surgical, though, yes, brutal removal of the specific source of corruption that had just almost wiped them out. It was a measure for survival.
That definitely shifts the framing from just pure conquest. Okay, speaking of internal rules, let's talk about the Old Testament laws themselves. Some of them are just breathtakingly severe.
Yes.
Capital punishment for things we would never consider capital crimes. For instance, he that curseth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death.
This brings us right back to the purpose of the legal code. These laws, which also demanded death for things like practicing witchcraft, they reflect how seriously they took sins that threatened the stability of the entire community.
So cursing your parents wasn't just a private family squabble.
No, it was seen as an assault on the foundational building block of their whole society. The family unit was everything. Undermining that was seen as undermining the nation.
The stability of the nation was everything.
It was paramount. And the judges who administered these laws were told to see the judgment as God's own. These laws were designed to show that any action that threatened that core stability was seen with the ultimate severity.
Okay. It's jarring to pivot from life and death, but Tier 2 forces us to look at things that are just confusing, like an inside joke we don't get.
Right.
What on earth do we do with a law that says, "Thou shalt not see the kid in his mother's milk"? It sounds like a bizarre recipe instruction.
It does. And this is a perfect example of a law that's all about creating a distinct identity, separating them from the nations around them.
So is countering some other practice?
Almost certainly. We don't have the specific pagan ritual text this was pushing back against, but the principle is clear. These laws fulfilled a purpose. The main purpose was to set Israel apart, to stop them from adopting pagan practices, and to constantly reinforce their own unique covenant.
So even if we don't know the exact pagan ritual it was prohibiting, we know why the law exists.
Exactly. It serves that deliberate purpose of separation.
Okay, let's look at a strange narrative detail. In 1 Samuel, the Philistines have the Ark of the Covenant, and it's causing plagues. To send it back, their priests tell them to make 5 golden emerods and 5 golden mice, golden tumors and golden mice. It sounds like a fairy tale. Why would they do that?
This is a fascinating glimpse into their culture. It shows how the Philistines understood divine judgment. They knew they were being afflicted by Israel's God, and in their worldview, when a powerful God hits you, you have to offer restitution, a trespass offering.
So they made gold replicas of the plagues themselves.
Yes. The tumors, the emerods, and the mice that were destroying their crops, it was a ritual acknowledgement of the specific affliction, a way of saying, we see your power, and we're trying to appease you.
They were trying to get God to lighten his hand, like the text says.
Exactly. But they were also scientists in a way. They set up a test. They said, if this cart carrying the ark goes straight back to Israel on its own, then we'll know he had done us this great evil. But if not,
then it was just a coincidence, a chance that happened to us.
Right. So the gold offering was their way of acknowledging a supernatural power while also setting up an experiment to confirm it.
That is a great example of needing that cultural context. Okay, let's move to something much darker. The narrative depravity in the book of Judges. I mean, genuine horror. The Levite who offers his daughter and his concubine to be abused instead of himself in Judges 19. The text is just full of sickening human failures.
And it's so important to understand that these passages, Judges, Lot, and his daughters, they are not instructions. They are not prescriptions for how to behave.
They're descriptive history.
Exactly. The text includes these horrifying accounts to show the absolute depths of human sin and what happens when society breaks down.
So it's a cautionary tale, not a guide.
Absolutely. The whole book of Judges is framed by this one recurring line. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. The horror is the point. It's an argument for the need for righteous, unified leadership by showing the chaos that happens without it.
Okay, that makes a huge difference. It's a mirror, not a manual. All right, let's go to Tier 3. Theological and interpretive anxiety. These are the passages that feel like the text is contradicting itself. Let's start with the big one. The command that says to follow the mission, you have to hate your father, mother, wife, and children.
This is where understanding idiomatic language is everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that verse seems to fly in the face of the command to honor your father and mother.
It seems like a direct contradiction.
It does. But the fix is realizing this is a classic Semitic hyperbole. It's an exaggeration used for a powerful, memorable effect.
So for us, hate means emotional animosity. What did it mean in that idiom?
In that ancient context, to love one thing and hate another was a common way of saying you prioritize one massively over the other. The classic example is Jacob. The text says he loved Rachel but hated Leah.
But we know from the story he didn't actually despise Leah. He had children with her.
Right. He just prioritized Rachel to an extreme degree. His love for Rachel was so great that, by comparison, his relationship with Leah looked like hate.
So the verse isn't about emotional hatred, it's about absolute spiritual priority.
That's it, exactly. Your devotion to the spiritual mission has to be so total that all other loves, even the most fundamental family bonds, look like hate by comparison. It's a statement about ultimate dedication.
That is a very satisfying resolution.
Okay,
but what about when God himself seems to act deceptively? In 1 Kings, God asks, "Who shall persuade Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead?" And then he approves a lying spirit to go into the mouths of Ahab's prophets. How can a God who is supposed to be truth itself actively use deception?
This story gets to a really deep theme in the text, which is divine sovereignty being used as an instrument of judgment. The Lord is actively using this lying spirit as a tool. Why? Because Ahab was already under a sentence of divine justice for his past evils, especially murdering a man named Naboth for his vineyard.
So the lying spirit isn't just random malice, it's a form of retribution.
It is. The narrative shows that God is ultimately in control of events, even deceptive ones, and can use them to bring about the downfall of those who have already condemned themselves through their actions. The spirit was just the mechanism to guide the wicked king to the judgment he had already earned.
Okay, so it shifts from a moral problem to a punitive action. One last one. King David is fleeing, and this man, Shimei, is cursing him and throwing stones. David tells his men to stand down because the Lord hath said unto him, "Curse David." Why would he believe God commanded this curse?
David connects this suffering directly to a theme we see elsewhere, the providence of affliction. He doesn't see Shimei's curse as just a random political attack. He sees it something God has bidden, or at least permitted.
Like a test.
Yes. It's very similar to how the text describes God leading Israel through the wilderness to humble them and to prove them.
Then David accepts it?
He embraces it with humility. He says, "It may be that the Lord will look on mine affliction, and that the Lord will requite me good for his cursing this day." He accepts the pain of the moment because he has faith that God will ultimately use it for a future good.
So whether it's violence, bizarre laws, or these tough theological knots, the answer isn't to ignore the text, but to dig deeper.
Absolutely. The main lesson from hermeneutics is that you can't just do a simple literalistic reading of a complex ancient text. You have to understand the history, the culture, and apply a purposeful interpretation. You have to look for the intended objective.
And knowing the difference between descriptive history, like the horrors and Judges, and a prescriptive command, or spotting a hyperbole, it stops you from getting overwhelmed and gives you a much richer, more coherent picture.
It does. And it allows us to see the complexity of the people in the text, too. We just saw David's amazing humility. But the text also shows his capacity for brutal political violence. It contains these really difficult, sometimes contradictory portraits of human nature. You have to handle it all with care.
So, if the goal of reading any complex document, a law, a constitution, or this ancient text is to find a meaning that furthers the purpose of the norm, what does reading the Bible with this kind of purposeful interpretation suggest is the ultimate enduring purpose we should always be trying to understand?
That is a very good question.
And it's a deep dive question for you to think about long after we're done.
That wraps up this Omni Deep Dive episode. Thank you for listening. If you found value in today's deep dive, please click like and subscribe to our channel. Take care.